1994 was a busy year for Natsume. They began the year by releasing a sequel to the original Ninja Warriors arcade game. This new title would be on the Super Nintendo and would be a beat-em-up, providing the player with 3 different characters to choose from. This title was seen as a success for the studio, as many praised it for being a quality beat-em-up. But this would not be the only title released by these developers that year. Following the completion of the Ninja Warriors, the studio had some downtime as they waited for their next contracted project to begin. This downtime resulted in the development of a cult classic Western shooter. Join me as we take a look back at Wild Guns. After finishing the Ninja Warriors, the developers were waiting for their next piece of contracted work to begin. So during this downtime, their bosses told them to develop a new game and were given 2 conditions. The game would need to be done quickly and cheaply. This meant that the developers had the creative freedom to pretty much tackle anything they wanted to, but it also meant that the scope of the project could not cause the project to take a long time to make. For reference, this game would end up being developed within just 5 months. The studio played around with doing a shooting game that would work with the player in the foreground, and then you would be shooting everything in the background. From the gameplay side of things, they were inspired by games like Dynamite Duke and Blood Brothers, with the visual setting being more inspired by the manga Cobra. In one of the early prototypes, the player could only move the reticle up and down and would need to actually move the player left and right to be able to change where you are shooting at. This resulted in a very clunky shooting system, and resulted in a smoother system where moving and aiming were all tied to the same controls for the final product. Another challenge the developers ran into was how the game got very chaotic, causing the game to not provide enough information to the player to assess where to dodge attacks. This resulted in the developers having a bubble come up whenever the player is being shot at. The developers wanted to set their shooter in the West, with each of the 2 playable characters dressed as classic Western characters. With input from the American office, the guy was named Clint for the game. As one might assume, this was intended to be based off Clint Eastwood, who starred in many spaghetti westerns. But from the developers' side of things, these characters were not based on anyone specific. The title for the Western shooter would be known as Wild Guns. The developers incorporated elements to give it a unique style to this game. For example, the developers incorporated several breakable objects that would break as the player shot them. This would include bullet holes on wooden boxes, along with lots of broken windows and bottles. While the focus of the action was on the shooting, some action game mechanics were included, like jumping to dodge bullets, along with shooting out a lasso to stun enemies. In an effort to keep the cost down, the limited voice acting in the game would be done by one of the developers, instead of a professional voice actor, and the lines were actually recorded in the office bathroom. Wild Guns had an interesting development where a bunch of talented developers had complete freedom but a limited period of time to design, make, and finish their game. In August 1994, Wild Guns was released to the world. Wild Guns is a Western gallery shooter with a high level of challenge and solid action. The visual design combines Western elements with some steampunk to give this a unique identity to the entire game. The gameplay keeps things simple and fun with a small moveset, and the action is all focused on the shooting. The entire game can be played in 2-player co-op, while the game is also very good in solo play, though the best way to play this is with a friend. Wild Guns is a very good time. The controls are simple, you can only move left and right. You can jump, use a special weapon, and fire your gun. It is important to note that you move your character and your crosshairs with the same buttons. As you fire, you are forced to remain still. If you hit the jump button while you are firing, you will perform a dodge to either your left or right. The shooting is really good with quality arcadey sound effects mixed with some satisfying impact. Enemies will react to your hits along with many of them exploding. What also heightens the shooting is the visual level of environmental destruction. You can destroy glass along with some objects in the environment, with some even providing cover for your enemies. The core action is really good as you try to bob and weave around bullets, as you also try to take out enemies as fast as you can. Each of the levels have a timer. Once it hits 0, then the stage starts the area's boss, as you kill enemies that will take time off the clock, helping you get through the area quicker. So you are actively rewarded for learning the maps along with playing better. As you defeat enemies, they will drop items for you to increase your score or weapon pickups. You want to try and get your score up since this is your only way to earn more lives. The weapon pickups range from a machine gun, shotgun, and a grenade launcher. There is a pea shooter as well, but it's a dud on purpose, and you cannot hurt anyone when you have it equipped. The game can get really chaotic, and I really like the small dialogue bubble that pops up to let you know that people are firing at you. Sometimes enemies will come onto your plane and try to melee you, and you need to quickly hit them before they take you out. There are some cool things that you can do as you experiment with the game. My first time playing the first few levels, I didn't know that you can actually pick up the TNT that is thrown at you and do a lot of damage as you toss it back. Along with this, you can hit the fire button several times to swing your lasso, and then send it out as a means to stun enemies. In addition, as you take out enemies, you will charge your power meter, and once it is full, you will unleash a stronger set of shots for a short period of time. Wild Guns is really simple to pick up and play, like a good arcade title, but it has a decent amount of nuances to help build up your skill. Learning how to use your lasso and appropriately dodging can really make all the difference in this game, and it's rewarding getting better at it. While there are only a handful of levels, the game provides a nice variety of locations, from a town to a bar, canyons, a train, caves, and more. The bosses are tough and are all visually different, and are usually some form of a mech. Enemy types are various gunmen, enemies that shoot out stuns, many robots, among others. On occasion, you will enter a bonus stage that acts like a shooting gallery, where you can get bonus points to earn more lives. This shooting gallery mode can be played by itself as well. You have two characters to choose from, with slightly different skills and colors for each costumes that you can change into. It is important to note that Wild Guns is very hard, but thankfully the gameplay is great and is highly replayable. This is a really fun game. I do want to briefly touch on the remaster Wild Guns Reloaded that was released in 2019. Visually, the remaster is really good, along with adding 2 more characters to play as. Overall, it is still fun to play, and I like some of the new guns, but it lacks a bunch of smaller things that will leave you scratching your head, especially if you have fond memories of the original. For example, in co-op in the original, players had their own separate lives, whereas in the remaster, the lives are all taken from one group pool, meaning one of your friends can use up all of your lives. I prefer the original's use of lives for this. Along with this, there is no option to play the shooting gallery segments that were in the original. I also found it odd that you are forced to listen to the remastered soundtrack, and you need to unlock the original to switch to it. The remastered music is good, but I wish the option was there to switch to it from the start. Wild Guns Reloaded is decent and very fun, but it is definitely lacking in some areas. Before we move to the conclusion, I want to mention the soundtrack. The music in this is awesome and has some great variations on famous spaghetti western songs. Here are a few tracks from the game. Wild Guns is an underrated western that deserves a sequel. The core action is solid while being very, very challenging. What I found really impressive was how this title was made in just a few months. I understand game development was a bit different back then, but to come up with a unique idea and setting with enjoyable gameplay, along with being a game that is highly replayable, deserves the highest amount of praise. The visual design has aged very well, along with the shooting and great soundtrack. If you are a fan of either western titles or two-player arcade titles, this is an easy recommendation. If you are interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.